This one is going to be, thank God, shorter. Hopefully it's about how when Homo colossus constructed the technosphere, it didn't think too hard about the requirement of constant repair and its ability to keep the whole thing up and running. And this is because I noticed stuff already, kind of like it seems like the infrastructure is a little bit falling apart, and people are talking about it, and perhaps the public would appreciate having a term to talk about it, which is Catabolic Collapse, coming from John Michael Greer. The way that I like to summarize it, which is that it is one step forward, two steps back. So when a culture is making progress in terms of its material footprint, at least, and the expansiveness of its technosphere, it is generally, it's not that it's not facing any setbacks. It's that when you recover, you exceed where you last were. So not only do you bounce back to normal, but you bounce beyond. Whereas at this point, every time you recover, you're still like falling short of where you last were. And that's all kind of related to the rate at which the fires are catching, both, literal fires as well as metaphorical ones, conflicts, other natural disasters, diseases, general falling apart of infrastructure, as well as, the rate at which everyone is able to organize, FEMA, whoever, to put it out and recover. And so I think the way that Greer describes it in the book, and the way that I've seen other people express it, and the fact that we all have this in common must mean that it does exist somewhere as an idea, is like, it's a mountain. Oh, and this is reversed. Wait. Okay, so if I'm going this way. Okay, so it's going like, it rises and then there's a little setback, but then you rise further, but then there's another setback. Oh, and also my fingers are dirty from gardening, sorry. And then it rises further, but then you reach a point where things start to go downhill, and then there's a small recovery, but then a further downhill, and then a little recovery, and then a farther downhill. Is that useful to visualize? I feel like it helps me out. Okay, next slide. So why might a Homo colossus colony fall behind on repairing its technosphere? A big part of that is supply chains, and so a number of things could disrupt supply chains. As we've recently experienced, it can be a matter of a pandemic or a natural disaster, sometimes not even like a one-time one, but the way in which drought has been keeping the Panama Canal low as well as the Mekong Delta, and so that has limited the traffic through there, plus conflict, Gaza, or even if you're just, your country is on poor relations with a country that is like the sole extractor of some resource that anybody really needs, if they, especially with these like high-tech stuff that we're creating, like they have all these rare minerals, and maybe it has a substitute, but maybe it doesn't. And it could be that you have enough of the 99 other parts that you need, but if you're missing that one part, you can't make the whole thing work. In a previous episode, I mentioned how Homo colossus has outsourced agency to the collective, to the superorganism. And part of how they do that is through specialization and professionals, which makes it also like hard to get things done. Dugald Hine, in his book At Work in the Ruins, mentions how the fact that we entrust all medical knowledge to medical professionals actually makes us less capable of responding to contagious disease outbreaks, because there are only so many people who are capable of treating the sick, whereas in previous times, a lot of people would have had the basic skills for delivering that kind of help. But like, also think about New York City and how there's 8 million people there, and yet if they got cut off from food deliveries, it doesn't matter that there's 8 million of them there, and it doesn't matter that those 8 million know how to do all kinds of different things. There is no level of cooperation that they could potentially engage in to make the food happen, simply because, again, we've like specialized those roles, and the food is happening somewhere else and growing and being caught and whatnot, and like that's not their job. And it really, the way that we cluster people makes us incapable of addressing issues and responding to hardship on our own compared to if everyone was a little bit more of a generalist. I previously likened civilizations, empires, and their technospheres to ticks with circulatory systems. And so, in a way, members of civilization, because they are deprived of general know-how, become, and access to materials, become dependent on that circulatory system. And then inevitably, when that circulatory system gets interrupted, they face consequences, right? And another part of this is diminishing innovation. Somewhere out there, there's a study that there are fewer patents these days than there used to be. Like there was a big burst of innovation and invention, and then now it's like less often that people actually come up with a great new concept. And also, when humans used to achieve things, it was like, yes, inventors were building upon other people's work. So like, it's not like Thomas Edison invented the light bulb entirely by himself, but in a way he was working alone, and Leonardo da Vinci was kind of working alone or whatever. But like in these days, when you have like a new Apple, like first of all, there's nothing new about the iPhone camera. It's just improvements, slight improvements. And then also it's like how many people are working to make that to figure out how to improve it that little bit. It's taking a lot, like the ROI is declining. It's taking much more investment of effort from people just to make slight enhancements to things. Before I go into another aspect of this, Breaking Down Collapse did, I think, 2 episodes about Catabolic Collapse where maybe they explain it better than I am right now. So I'm going to link those below in the description, as well as the Nature article where they actually, I think, do like a meta-analysis of all history of patents or whatever. But the other reason that things are probably going to fall behind is because we are going to be having diminishing access to fossil fuels. In my notes, I was thinking about referring to this as fossil juice, since I'm going with this whole theme of like othering what we consider to be like normal humans by calling them Homo colossus, or at least I attempt to. So like maybe I should also like call fossil fuels something so that we can kind of like emotionally distance ourselves from it and see like what a weird substance it actually is. We'll see if I end up doing that continuously. But right now, the like workforce of this colony, the Homo colossus colony, civilization, empires, whatever you want to call it, it has been accessing the work, or it's like running on the work of about 5 billion true living humans, plus probably like 500 billion, the equivalent of 500 billion people in the form of machines powered by fossil juice. That's a lot of extra assistance. And it had been rising, but now the amount that we're able to access is going to be declining. In previous videos and writings, I have explained why we should all expect industrial energy to be declining soon. So I'm not going to re-explain it, but I will, in the description of this video, link to all the previous content about that. So in the previous video about the technosphere, I referred to nation states and their infrastructure, and then the institutions that are dependent on that infrastructure to function. Those whole things are either a single cybertick, maybe they're multiple cyberticks, and they all make up this superorganism that is encircling the globe. And so now in this segment, I am going to attempt to explain why I expect that as that superorganism cybertick, as it can no longer increasingly just expand the amount of material that it is metabolizing from the planet, why I expect that to not be particularly like handled well, and it won't be pretty. And by the way, I'm not an expert and I might not know what I'm talking about. And so now imagine that there are 5 cabins in the woods that burn wood for heat. And it's the red cabin, orange cabin, yellow cabin, green cabin, and blue cabin. And every day they go into the woods and they harvest more biomass, more wood than they did previously. And so maybe then they would be fair about splitting it up equally among the 5 cabins, or potentially certain cabins would claim more of that expanded harvested wood for themselves. Nevertheless, it would be theoretically possible, even with certain cabins bringing home more wood than, or expanding their share more than the rate that others expand their share, everyone could still be either maintaining or expanding their own share because the total that you're grabbing is expanding. But if your access to firewood then starts to decline, yes, everyone could kind of equally sacrifice and equally reduce how much they resolve to take home of whatever you collectively harvested. However, it's also very possible or likely that one cabin will decide that they want to maintain the same amount of firewood that they're used to bringing home from the peak harvest time, which would mean that the other cabins would have to take a double hit to their wood harvest, not only because, first of all, the total amount of firewood is declining, but also because at least one of the houses is insisting on keeping as much as it usually does of what they managed to chop down. So you're kind of being squeezed from two directions. Hopefully that clicks for someone. I'm sorry for not articulating it very clearly. One additional complicating factor here is that each barrel has a mixed composition of different types of fuels, and they can't all apply to the same thing. And so even if you decide that, well, purpose A is the priority, so we should devote the entire barrel to purpose A, but it actually might turn out that you can't use all of the contents of the barrel for whatever that purpose is. And so that is also a limiter. So for example, maybe the nation decides that the priority is trucking food to its people, and so it wants to devote all of the oil that it's able to access to that. However, maybe some of it isn't the type of fuel that can power a truck. Maybe it is the bitumen or whatever that makes up asphalt. And so even though you don't necessarily in an emergency care about repairing a pothole in a road, the barrel doesn't care because that's the kind of fuel that it, or material that it also contains. And I guess if you wanted to convert one type of fuel to another, in some cases it is chemically possible, but then you also lose energy in that process and it's complicated and time consuming. Anyway, not ideal. Another thing is that in the beginning you might be able to eliminate non-essential purposes, but eventually, because it's all going to be counting down to zero, you'll get to a point where you've already phased out the non-essential things, and then whoever's in charge, if there is still a functioning government at that point, is going to be forced to begin to phase out essential things as well. And that's if the people in charge of governments, of companies, whatever, are wise enough to phase out the non-essential stuff first. So that brings me to point number 3 at this point in terms of complicating factors, which is, it's not like when all of this is going down that nation states are going to send their wisest elders to all cooperate and make a reasonable plan. Just like the response to COVID was a little bit chaotic, I expect, because this is even more disruptive, that nation states aren't going to approach this in a rational, coordinated, calm way. And we might find out that all of the activity that the various cogs in the superorganism machine are involved in is like a bike, in that you don't need to dismantle the whole thing to make it stop functioning. It just needs a few key parts to break down, and then the whole thing stops working. During a presentation a couple semesters ago, I made the comparison as well to a rubber band. And just because we are able to stretch nature's rules doesn't mean that we can succeed in breaking them. It just means that the more that we stretch them and overstep, the harder the rubber band is ultimately going to snap back. I also see this as a hot potato situation where it's not going to be fun to be the leader of any nation state when ish really starts to hit the fan. Unless you are someone who is like really a sociopath, which is kind of probably the people that are going to run for office at that point. Because like there's going to be no easy way out. None of the options is going to be fun to decide on. There isn't gonna, none of the ways that you could possibly handle the situation would sit well with everyone. So no matter what, whoever's in charge is going to have to do some, I don't know what they're going to do, but whatever it is, it's probably going to be pretty unpopular. And some kind of transition to clean energy would not solve this problem. It's nowhere near solving this problem because there is still so much about everything that we're doing that is dependent on fossil fuels and nowhere near being designed to exist without them. And even if we did find a way to do that, then it would just prolong the Homo colossus reign of terror on this planet. This whole process that we're in of converting it into a playground for our one species, our one society within the species. And yeah, really the whole problem is just this entire mode of existence. And at the current moment, what's going to seem like the biggest weakness of ours is our reliance on the technosphere, on the circulatory system of the superorganism and all of the materials that it gives us access to, including some very basic ones that support our survival. So if you'd like a curated list of headlines about how the system is already breaking down, I will link to my Substack, and these are the posts that describe what's already happening, as well as what I anticipate will happen over the next few years and decades. Bringing back that raccoon analogy, it's as if we're a bunch of animals that were meant to live like all the others, and then we've temporarily been managing to break the rules so that we can live differently, but we don't realize that this is a temporary game, and we really aren't prepared for its inevitable end that is coming up. Or what I mean is, like, if you encountered a fox and a raccoon having a tea party in the woods, you would think, what was my lunch laced with? Whereas when we just go to some kind of work function, these like cringy events that people brag about on LinkedIn, we look around those and people, probably not so much the people who are watching this, but the general public doesn't realize how strange and unnatural that behavior is for us too. And I've mentioned before the phrase "a species out of context," and I've explained why I think that the point of no return isn't some climate tipping point, but it was when our species, my ancestors and yours, stopped passing down the knowledge of how to exist in a dramatically different way that has a much lower metabolism and therefore can last, as opposed to how I've been raised to try to survive, which is not a strategy that can last. And another thing that occurred to me while I've been drafting this stuff is that now we don't belong anywhere. I don't belong anywhere, meaning that on the one hand, I am like inhabiting this body that has a history of like, how many years, 200,000, 300,000 years since like humans, Homo sapiens first appeared. And so like most of my settings and brain activity and stuff is emerged during that time and is meant to deal with those types of circumstances. And yet here over the last few thousand years, and particularly the last few hundred, we've created vastly different circumstances that are kind of like, this isn't designed for what I'm surrounded by and isn't compatible with it. And that's why we all have mental health, chronic physical issues, all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, at this point, because I wasn't raised to have certain other competencies, if you just dropped me in the type of setting where my ancestors 100,000 years ago would have been comfortable, I also wouldn't be comfortable or be able to survive there. So yes, I've realized that we are very struggling with a lack of like a place where we fit. So in conclusion, leading up to this point, the technosphere has been in the process of erasing the biosphere, versus now we're entering a time where it's the technosphere's turn to face decline, deterioration, expiration. And it's going to get interesting, and don't be too hard on yourself because we really put ourselves in a tough position and there is maybe only so much you can do.